Resilience+RISE, the podcast, where resilience is not just a concept, it's a lived experience. I'm your host, Thomas Scaria, a resilience coach, an ultramarathoner, and a relentless believer in the human spirit's ability to rise. This podcast is a companion to my book, Resilience+RISE 26.2 Transformative Miles to Unleash Your Marathon of Life Mindset. Each episode is a raw, unfiltered dive into the stories of those who have faced life's hardest battles and emerged stronger. Today's guest, before this podcast, I had a talk with her, and I mentioned to her is that it would be a total injustice on my part if I would just confine this podcast to around 25 minutes. So, with her permission, this podcast is going to be a two-part podcast. Once you work through the podcast, you'll know why it requires two of my releases to come to this. I'm proud to introduce to you Dr. Robyn Lynette. And as she mentions, she has lived several lifetimes before she turned 40. She is an author. She's an athlete. She's a former cult kid. Yes, you heard it right, cult kid. And now she considers herself, and she shows that she's a mental MacGyver. She has mastered the art of making herself small, a hyper-observant and self-sacrificing. And she used to always dim the brightness of a naturally big personality. She's a survivor. She's ready to introduce her book. I'd like to thank the Cartel for getting me out of the cult. That title itself, it's a no-holds-barred or raw, honest look at what took her to rebuild her life after, in simple, straightforward words, just manipulations, control, abuse. That was just the start of it, but further than that, there was a lot. But showing how awareness and truth can turn survival into strength. It is not a trauma dump, this book. But before we can go, I can talk a lot about it. But Dr. Robyn, welcome to Resilience+RISE, the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am excited, and what a beautiful job you just did on that introduction. Thank you.
As you say, you're worth it. So, Dr. Robyn, you have come to the space wherein you're ready to bare your soul. And you come to a space wherein you realize there is a lot of strength from what you've gone through, as you put it, as many lifetimes. Wherein I do say in my podcast time and again, from our deepest of wounds shines the brightest of lights. It's taken from Rumi, but it comes as there is a purpose at times when we go through some of the challenges, the valleys of our life. That's when we know on how to get to the top. And you've shown what it means to be a survivor. So what made you the person that you are?
Oh my goodness. In 25 minutes, you want me to tell me what made you the person? Oh my good. That's a big question. So you mentioned born into a cult, married off to my first cousin at 18. He moved me from California out to Charlotte, North Carolina, so 3,000 miles from home. It took me about 6 months to realize three things. He wasn't very bright, he was badly in debt, and he had a drug problem.
Could I pause you? Sorry about, you mentioned a cult.
Yes.
Could I ask what that, was it a religious cult or what type of cult it was?
That's a good question. So it was a religious cult, not one of the big ones, like if I said the name of it, you'd be like, I don't know. But it was based on the teachings of John Calvin. So very Protestant, very, I'm going to use the word derogatory toward women. My dad used to say that women shouldn't be allowed to vote, but we have to let our women vote because the heathens let their women vote. Like very much suppression of women, and women are expected to be subservient, submissive, quiet, obedient. I wasn't very good at any of those things.
But again, when I look at, okay, if that was what you have been born for, you were built up, the societal or the parental or the environmental, that's what they made you believe. That was what
It's grooming. It's absolutely
grooming.
grooming.
And see, because for me, it was okay. I'm in this particular well, and this is what I see the sky to be, just that small piece of land on top. Some blue on top, but I know this is what life is. So when you got married and you realize that you mentioned 3 elements about your husband, correct me if I'm wrong, he was not too bright. I got that. He had a drug problem.
And he was in debt.
He was in debt. Wow. Okay. So, but for you, please continue. Yes. So then what happened?
So for me, those 3 things actually ended up being silver linings. Because he wasn't very bright, he couldn't maintain the grooming we were just talking about. Like he could not keep that in place. Because he was in debt, he needed me to get a job. Married women in my family don't work outside the home. So that was a big deal. Now the grooming is falling apart and I have a job. But I stayed because I am resilient to the point of being stubborn. I made a commitment. I'm going to make it work. And 8.5 years later, because he had a drug problem, he ended up throwing me out. He told me it was because he didn't love me. He didn't want to be married to me. And he didn't want me living in his house. Never mind that house was a slab of concrete, plywood walls, and a tin roof. I had to cut the grass in the bedroom because it would grow under the wall. I was living on a catfish farm. He told my dad he threw me out because I was lazy. And my dad called and told me if I had been appropriately submissive, I would have been able to make it work.
Okay. That would be, you would have felt in his own way the world crashing, because again, for a lot of children growing up, parents, what they say is absolutely the truth a lot of times. And you feel that what you have been groomed for, or what you believe that your holy life should be, that is not what has come across.
I felt a lot of shame.
Tell me about that.
I knew that getting out of that marriage was the right thing for me to do. I knew that it was better for my life, but I felt like it was the wrong thing to do before God. I included this letter in the book. I got a letter from the church basically telling me, are you going to live with your husband as you promised before God? And they included a box like they were in 5th grade, check yes or no. And it's in the book. You have to read the book. But I really felt a lot of shame because I felt like it was right for me as a human being and what I needed to do to live my best life. But I felt like it was wrong before the God that I had been told I should worship and adore, and that therefore I was going to go to hell. And that juxtaposition was really hard.
So by the time you're a little around 25, you have to make a
26, 20, yeah.
26, 27, you have to make a life-altering decision on what you need to do. The next step, and of course the biggest support coming in the form of the church walking away from you, breaking the ties from you.
Right.
What was going on in your mind? Because during that time, the way I look at it is that you have been taught a certain way that the world operates, and now you're taking on something which you did not know about. So what happened?
I basically had to figure out how to be an adult. I had never made decisions on my own. I didn't know. I was so lost. I can't even articulate how lost I was. But I was very fortunate because I had started playing some volleyball and I got invited to play on a couple of different teams. And I ended up playing competitive beach volleyball. And so I ended up with friends. And that made a difference for me. I had friends.
Okay. I do believe is that sometimes Providence, God, how we say is that they give us some support. And again, I mentioned time and again on my podcast is that we all are angels with one wing. When we start holding another, that's when we start flying higher.
That's beautiful. Unfortunately, I did not do enough therapy. I should have done more therapy than I did.
Okay, but it allowed you to grow. So then what happened after that?
So then I made my own mistake because I didn't do enough therapy. I married a narcissistic, closeted bisexual. 0 out of 5 stars. Do not recommend. And he moved me from Charlotte up to Long Island. And at that point, I was just a pretty girl with a high school diploma. I couldn't get a job. No one would hire me.
Okay.
And he said to me, "We don't need your silly money anyway. Why don't you just go to college?" And then he took a job in London, England, left me on Long Island. And so I did. I started college at 32 and I got 3 degrees in 6 years while flying back and forth to Europe to be arm candy, basically, and host wine tastings and dinner parties to grease the wheels of my husband's corporate career.
Wow, 3 degrees. That says a lot from a person whose mind was very much shackled by a certain way of upbringing. So when you went and you got into these degrees, etc., what was the world on the other side? I'm not talking about Europe, but what did you discover about your own self?
Well, I was in college and taking a course when I realized I'd grown up in a cult. I didn't know I had grown up in a cult
Okay.
until I started taking a college class and we were studying cults. And I was like, wait a minute, this sounds like my life. Like, I just thought I grew up with a very fanatic religious father.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started studying it, I was like, oh, I grew up in a cult. And I still at that point was not telling my true story. Like when people asked me, like, how did you meet your first husband? I wouldn't say he was my cousin. I would just say, oh, he was a friend of the family. Like I was covering for people. And the process of going to college and kind of unraveling that really changed how I viewed my past. And that's a really strange position to be in, where you think you know who you are, and then you learn new things. Like when I learned that the reason my first husband had thrown me out was because he got involved with a cartel and they didn't like me,
Mm-hmm.
that for me was mind-blowing. And that was part of the growth for me, was allowing those changes to my history to happen.
Well, as they say, that from the hurts come the light at the end of the tunnel. You don't know if it's a train coming towards you or whether it's the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about when you got into this particular aspect of cartel. Did you realize that was a cartel, or did you realize there was something wrong? You just felt it was a way of life, and you continue.
So I knew, so we're talking about my first husband now.
Yes.
I knew that the people that he was attracted to as friends were not up and up people. Like I knew that there were parties where there was cocaine on tables. I knew that they were shady, but I just thought that they were shady. So when I got the phone call, and this is after we had split up, but before we were legally divorced, that there had been a big break-in. I call it the apple strudel heist in my book, and I think it's hysterical. But
Okay.
there was a big break-in, $250,000 in cash went missing, some guns went missing. I got a call from the Pineville Sheriff's Department and asking me questions about people I knew. And I'm like, I have no idea. I just thought it was messy. It wasn't until years later when my husband came back, my first husband came back and wanted to try again. And he actually told me the story of what had happened, that I realized that those people were not only part of a cocaine ring, but were part of the cartel.
Wow. And so you got, I don't know if I'm saying the word lucky as a right sense, but you were able to break. Fortunate, that would be a more
because
pleasant word.
The cartel wanted me out of that marriage because they were trying to steal my husband's identity. And I was a problem because I worked for the bank and I kept seeing these weird things happen. And I was canceling stuff and deleting stuff from our credit. And I was in the way. And let me tell you, being in the way of the cartel is a dangerous place to be. I just didn't know how much danger I was in. I was really fortunate that they convinced him to throw me out rather than getting rid of me in a less clean way.
And what about the wonderful European experience?
So the traveling back and forth to Europe was actually really interesting because it was there that I realized, because obviously I was rubbing elbows with some very powerful people. I realized that these very powerful people were really unhappy. I mean, they had fancy hobbies like flying and sailboating and whatnot, but they were unhappy. And when I started the work of studying sports psychology, because my degree has a element of high performance and sports psychology, I noticed that what I was seeing in athletes, high performance athletes, whether they're college or pros, and the issues I was seeing with these mostly men when I was rubbing elbows in Europe were very similar. And I came to the conclusion that whether you're using your brawn or your brain, the human aspect of it, the high performance and the drama are all the same stuff.
Okay. I would love to get into that. And guys, before we can proceed, I'll be putting Dr. Robyn Lynette's information down in the comments below. Her book is ready for pre-order. If this has intrigued you, I'm sure if you pick the book, there will be a lot more to dig into. But before we can go into that particular aspect, is that so? When you said about your husband who was a bisexual narcissist and did I miss out something else, abusive, etc., how did you realize it was time for you to break the bonds over there?
Yeah, I do want to mention the website real quick for the book, thankthecartel.com, just so it's on the audio so people can hear it. But how did I realize? So with my second husband, he was very psychologically abusive. So a lot of gaslighting and I can talk really. Ambiguous relationships are the most toxic. So sometimes he was love bombing and he was buying me gifts and being so kind and telling me that I was this amazing human and talking about how much he loved me. And then on the other side, he was gaslighting and telling me that I was dumb and who gave you permission to write a book and just being really nasty. And I never knew from one phone call, one interaction to the next, whether I was going to get the nice guy or the mean guy.
Okay.
And that's what keeps you off balance. And the last straw for me, and I do write about this in the book, the last straw for me was I knew that he was involved with women and men. And I had stopped being involved with him physically because it just wasn't safe for me. But I had told him, I have two rules, just two: be nice to me and don't lie. And the last straw for me was we were at a diner having brunch, and he was talking to me about how amazing I was and how he knew he was hard to live with and that we had to figure out how to make our relationship work. But the whole time he was texting. And he was talking about an outage at work, problem at work, blah, blah, whatever. We got done and he got up and went to the bathroom and he left his phone laying face up on the table. And it buzzed and I looked at it, and upside down, I read a text string that included a text that said, I can't get divorced because Robyn's being such a bitch. She was trying to steal the house. And so I picked up the phone and I looked at it, and it was a whole conversation with his current lover, who also happened to be married, talking about how horrible I was and how mean I was and how he couldn't believe that I had tricked him into marrying him, which is not at all what happened. Like all of these lies. And when he came back from the bathroom, I told him, I'm done. I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not playing this game.
Well, that would have been quite a bit of a roller coaster, and two marriages or two experiences that really changed up the entire tone about what life should be.
We do have to, though, make sure that we note that I am married now to a really good partner for me.
Fantastic.
He's a former competitive bodybuilder, trainer on the Mr. Olympia tour. I had to ask him out 4 times. That story's in the book too. But I am in a really good place now. So the chaos did eventually end.
That's what it's always happens, right? It's only through the grime and the dirt when you realize, and the seed opens up and blossoms into the plant that realizes what's the next part of it. Which reminds me, guys, just being mindful of the time. I would stop this conversation over here, and we will wait for the next episode when we realize what Dr. Robyn Lynette is capable of and how she has transformed her life to be the personality that she is, the force of nature, the mental MacGyver, and the reason people believe in how she conducts herself and her coaching and the business. makes a lot of difference. So, Dr. Robyn, with this, I would say thank you until
Thank
we
you.
meet for the next time and continue your story about what happened